The morning light streamed through the faded curtains of Rose Chen's small apartment on the east side of town. At 78, Rose had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of her days. A cup of tea at sunrise, the crossword puzzle from the daily paper, and occasional visits from the neighborhood children who called her Grandma Rose, even though none were related by blood. Today started like any other until the phone rang, cutting through the peaceful silence. Rose moved carefully across the worn carpet, her slippers shuffling against the floor as she reached for the receiver. "Hello?" Her voice was soft but clear. "Is this Rose Chen?" The voice on the other end was cheerful, almost too bright for so early in the morning. "Yes, speaking. Wonderful. My name is Diana from Hidden Stars. We're a television show that finds everyday people with extraordinary talents. Your neighbor Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be perfect for our program." Rose frowned slightly. She hadn't spoken to Mrs. Patterson in weeks, not since their brief encounter at the mailboxes downstairs. She couldn't remember mentioning anything that would warrant this call. "I think there's been some mistake," Rose said. "I'm just an old woman. No extraordinary talents here." Diana laughed, the sound practiced and polished. "That's what everyone says. But Mrs. Patterson told us you used to play the piano. Is that right?" Rose's eyes drifted to the corner of her living room where an upright piano stood covered with a thin layer of dust. It had been her husband Thomas's last gift to her before cancer took him 3 years ago. In the months after his passing, she couldn't bring herself to touch it. The memories were too sharp, too painful. "I used to tinker a bit," Rose admitted, "many years ago." "Perfect. That's exactly the kind of hidden talent we're looking for on our show. Regular people surprising our audience. We'd love to have you come to the studio for an audition." Rose was about to refuse when Diana added, "There's a stipend for everyone who appears on the show. $500 just for showing up. More if you make it to the final segment." The mention of money made Rose pause. Her Social Security check barely covered rent and utilities. The medication for her arthritis was becoming more expensive. Each month, and the property taxes on the small house she still owned in the countryside were coming due. $500 would help tremendously. "Could you tell me more about what I would need to do?" Rose asked cautiously. 2 days later, a sleek black car pulled up outside Rose's apartment building. The driver, a young man with kind eyes named Raj, helped her into the back seat with genuine care. As they drove through the city toward the television studio, Rose clutched her purse tightly on her lap. Inside was a faded photograph of her and Thomas on their 50th wedding anniversary, sitting together at the piano. She had brought it for courage. "First time on TV?" Raj asked, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes," Rose nodded. "I'm not sure why they want an old woman like me. Seems strange, doesn't it?" Raj's smile faltered slightly. "The show has changed recently. New producers, new direction." He seemed about to say more, but then focused back on the road. The studio was overwhelming. Bright lights, busy people rushing in every direction, the constant hum of equipment and chatter. Rose felt invisible as she stood in the entryway until a young woman with a clipboard approached. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Lily, a production assistant. Let's get you to the green room." Lily led her through a maze of corridors, eventually showing her into a small waiting room with a few chairs and a table of refreshments. "The other contestants will be here soon. Make yourself comfortable. Someone will come get you when it's time." Left alone, Rose sank into a chair, suddenly questioning her decision to come. The room felt cold and impersonal. On a small television in the corner, she could see a current episode of Hidden Stars playing. The host, a handsome man named Ryan Walsh with perfectly styled hair, was interviewing a young boy who had just finished a skateboarding routine. The door swung open, and a group of production staff walked in, engaged in conversation, seemingly unaware of her presence. "Is the piano tuned for the old lady segment?" one asked, scrolling through his phone. "Yeah, all set for golden years, golden laughs," another replied with a chuckle. "This should be good. Ryan's jokes are brutal for this one." "Poor thing, probably. Hasn't touched a piano in decades," a woman with sharp features added. "Davis wants plenty of close-ups on her face when she messes up. Says the contrast between confidence and failure tests great with focus groups." Rose felt her chest tighten as their words registered. They weren't looking for talent. They were planning to mock her, to put her on display like some sideshow attraction, an old woman to laugh at when her fingers failed to create music. The group left without ever acknowledging her, the door swinging shut behind them. Rose stood on shaky legs, ready to find the exit, when the door opened again. A different young woman entered carrying a water bottle and a small plate of cookies. "Thought you might like something to eat," she said, placing them on the table beside Rose. "I'm Zoe. I help with guest relations." Rose didn't reach for the offerings. "I heard them. They want to make fun of me." Zoe's face fell, genuine remorse washing over her features. "You weren't supposed to. I'm so sorry." "I should leave," Rose said, reaching for her purse. Zoe hesitated, then sat down beside her. "Yes, you probably should. The show's format changed 6 months ago. The new producer, Davis, thinks making fun of people brings in viewers. It's awful, especially this new segment targeting seniors." Rose felt a flush of anger replace her embarrassment. "Why would anyone watch such a thing?" "People can be cruel," Zoe said simply, "but not everyone. Many of the staff hate what the show's become." Rose stood, her dignity returning in waves. "Please call me a taxi." As Zoe reached for her phone, she paused. "Can I ask you something? Do you really play piano?" "I did," Rose said. "Long ago." "Were you any good?" The question caught Rose off guard. Good? By whose standards? She thought back to her youth, to the small conservatory where she had studied until meeting Thomas. Her teacher had once told her she had hands that speak the language of Chopin fluently. She had given up a scholarship to a prestigious music school to marry and start a family, a decision she never regretted, but sometimes wondered about in the quiet hours of night. "I was." "Adequate," Rose replied. Zoe studied her face. "You know what would really throw a wrench in Davis's plans if you actually played beautifully? They're expecting a disaster. Imagine their faces if you gave a stunning performance instead." "I haven't touched a piano in years," Rose protested. "My arthritis." "Just a thought," Zoe said, turning back to her phone. Then she added, "The segment doesn't air live. If it goes poorly, you can refuse to sign the release form. They legally can't show it without your permission." Rose's mind drifted to Thomas. How he had saved for years to buy her that piano, insisting that her music was too beautiful to exist only in memory. "You were meant to play, Rosie," he'd told her countless times. "Promise me you won't let anyone take that away from you again." She had played for him during his final months, her fingers finding strength even when her heart was breaking. After he was gone, the music went with him. "Until now, what's the most challenging piece you can play?" Zoe asked, curiosity brightening her eyes. Rose thought for a moment. "Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." Zoe's eyebrows shot up. "That's supposedly one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written." A smile, small but determined, formed on Rose's lips. "Yes, it is." The anger that had flared within her transformed into something more powerful. Resolve. These people thought age had rendered her talents laughable. They had invited her here, to be humiliated, to serve as entertainment through failure. "I think," Rose said slowly, "that I'd like to stay after all." Zoe looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Rose nodded, reaching into her purse to touch the photograph of her and Thomas. Some lessons need to be taught by those who've lived long enough to learn them well. As Zoe left to inform the producers that their Golden Years contestant was ready, Rose closed her eyes and began to move her fingers silently in her lap, tracing the patterns of notes she had once known by heart. The pain in her joints protested, but underneath it, muscle memory stirred to life. She had 3 hours before filming. 3 hours to remember what her hands were capable of. 3 hours to prepare a performance they would never forget. The green room grew busier as filming time approached. Other contestants drifted in and out. A teenage boy with a yo-yo, twin sisters who painted portraits using only their feet, and a middle-aged man who could recite entire movie scripts from memory. None stayed long enough to chat with Rose, who remained quietly seated in the corner, her fingers continuing their silent practice on her lap. Every so often, Rose would wince as a sharp pain shot through her knuckles. The arthritis had worsened over the past winter, and there were mornings when she struggled just to button her cardigan, but she kept moving her fingers, tracing the patterns of Chopin's masterpiece, a piece she hadn't performed in public since she was 23 years old. A makeup artist named Penny bustled in, setting down a large case beside Rose. "Let's get you camera ready, dear," she said with practiced cheerfulness, though her eyes held genuine warmth. As Penny applied powder to Rose's face, she chatted about the weather, her children, and her dream of opening a small bakery someday. The normalcy of the conversation calmed Rose's nerves. "You have beautiful skin," Penny remarked. "Such lovely laugh lines around your eyes." "My husband used to call them my map of happiness," Rose replied softly. "Said each one marked a moment of joy we'd shared." Penny's hands paused briefly. "That's the sweetest thing I've ever heard." When Penny finished, she held up a mirror. Rose barely recognized herself. The makeup wasn't overdone, but it highlighted her features in a way that made her look both dignified and vibrant. "Thank you," Rose said, genuinely touched. Penny leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I heard what they're planning for your segment. Just know not all of us agree with the new direction of the show." She squeezed Rose's shoulder gently before packing up her supplies. Left alone again, Rose closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. What had she gotten herself into? It had been decades since she'd played for anyone other than Thomas and occasionally their grandchildren. Her fingers felt stiff and doubt crept in like an unwelcome visitor. The door swung open again and Zoe rushed in, slightly breathless. "They're almost ready for you," she said. "I managed to sneak into the studio and check the piano. It's a beautiful Steinway grand, perfectly tuned." She hesitated, then added, "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to back out." Rose thought of the producer's words, their plan to humiliate her for entertainment. She thought of Thomas, who had always believed in her talent even when she doubted herself. She thought of her grandchildren, who might someday see this footage and learn that their quiet grandmother had once been something more. "I'm sure," Rose said with newfound resolve. Zoe nodded, respect evident in her eyes. "The host, Ryan Walsh, can be pretty harsh. Try not to let him get to you." "At my age," Rose replied with a small smile, "very little gets to me anymore." A sharp knock at the door was followed by a production assistant with a clipboard. "Mrs. Chen, we're ready for you." Rose stood smoothing down the simple navy blue dress she had chosen for the occasion. It was one of Thomas's favorites, preserved carefully in the back of her closet for special occasions. This certainly qualified, though not in the way she had ever imagined. Zoe gave her a quick, encouraging hug. "Show them what you're made of." The walk to the stage felt endless. Rose could hear the audience beyond the heavy curtains, their murmurs and occasional laughter creating a wall of sound that made her stomach tighten. The production assistant guided her to a small waiting area just off stage. Through a gap in the curtains, Rose could see Ryan Walsh working the crowd, his charisma undeniable as he joked and bantered with the audience. He was handsome in the polished way of television personalities, with not a single hair out of place, and now, Ryan announced, his voice taking on an exaggerated tone of enthusiasm, "We have a very special segment we're calling Golden Years, Golden Laughs." The audience chuckled appreciatively. "We've found some charming seniors who believe they still have what it takes to showcase talents from their younger days." Ryan continued with a wink that made the audience laugh harder. "Let's see if the years have been kind to their abilities, shall we?" Rose felt her cheeks flush with indignation. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Before she could dwell on it further, the production assistant nudged her forward. "And here's our first golden star," Ryan called out, as Rose stepped onto the brightly lit stage. Mrs. Rose Chen, 78 years young. The lights were blinding, making it difficult for Rose to see the audience clearly. She moved carefully across the stage, conscious of the cameras tracking her every step. Ryan approached, microphone in hand, his smile wide but his eyes calculating. "Welcome to Hidden Stars, Rose," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that seemed supportive but felt patronizing. "Tell us a little about yourself." "I'm a widow," Rose said simply. "I live alone in the east side of town. I have 3 children and 7 grandchildren." "Wonderful," Ryan replied, though his tone suggested he found nothing particularly wonderful about it. And I understand you used to play the piano? Yes. How long ago was that? Ryan asked, his voice lilting with amusement, as if the answer would surely be comical. I've played throughout my life, Rose answered, refusing to give him the response he wanted. My husband gave me that piano in the corner of my apartment for our 30th anniversary. Ryan nodded, impatience flickering across his features as he failed to extract the helpless elderly narrative he'd been expecting. Well, we have a beautiful Steinway grand piano right here, he said, gesturing toward the center of the stage where a spotlight illuminated the magnificent instrument. Are you ready to show us what you can do? I believe I am, Rose replied quietly. As she walked toward the piano, Rose could hear whispers and some poorly disguised snickers from the audience. The camera followed her, zooming in on her hands, which bore the visible swelling of arthritis around the knuckles. She sat carefully on the bench, taking a moment to adjust its height. The keys before her gleamed under the stage lights, pristine ivory and ebony inviting her touch. Rose placed her fingers lightly on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness so different from her well-worn upright at home. Ryan stood nearby, microphone ready. What will you be playing for us today, Rose? Rose took a deep breath. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. She heard a few murmurs from the musicians in the studio band off stage. One of them whispered loudly enough for the microphones to catch. Is she serious? That's a conservatory piece. Ryan's smile widened, taking on a predatory quality. That sounds very ambitious, he said, glancing toward the judges' table where 3 industry professionals sat with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. Whenever you're ready. Rose closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the lights, the cameras, the skeptical audience. In her mind, she was 23 again, sitting in the small recital hall at the conservatory, her teacher nodding encouragingly from the front row. She thought of Thomas, who had sat in the back that day, watching her with eyes full of admiration and love, the day they first met. This is for you. Thomas, she whispered, too softly for the microphones to catch. The first notes were tentative, her fingers protesting as they pressed down on the keys. Rose heard a muffled laugh from somewhere in the audience and felt a camera move in closer, ready to capture her failure. Then something remarkable happened. As the familiar melody began to take shape, her hands remembered what her conscious mind had feared forgotten. The music flowed from some deep, untouched place within her, a wellspring of memory and emotion that arthritis couldn't reach. The gentle, questioning opening measures filled the studio. Rose felt her body relax as decades of tension melted away. By the time she reached the more intricate passages, her fingers were moving with a fluidity that defied her age, dancing across the keys with purpose and precision. She was vaguely aware of the shifting atmosphere in the studio, the gradual silence that fell over the audience, the cameraman's stunned expression as he adjusted his shot, the director frantically signaling from offstage to capture every moment. But Rose was no longer playing for them. She was playing for Thomas, for the girl she had once been, for all the music that had lived silently within her for so many years. As the piece built toward its passionate climax, tears slipped down her cheeks. But her hands never faltered. When the final notes faded into silence, Rose remained still, her eyes closed, her heart pounding. For a moment, the studio was completely quiet, as if everyone present was holding their breath. Then the audience erupted into applause, hesitant at first, then building into thunderous appreciation. Rose opened her eyes to see people rising to their feet, their expressions transformed from mockery to wonder. Ryan stood frozen beside the piano, the smug smile gone from his face, replaced by genuine astonishment. For perhaps the first time in his television career, he appeared completely lost for words. The standing ovation continued for nearly a full minute. Rose sat motionless at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. Her hands, which had moved with such surprising grace moments ago, now trembled slightly in her lap. She hadn't expected this. Not the thunderous applause, not the tears on strangers' faces, and certainly not the way her own heart felt suddenly lighter, as if something long buried had finally been set free. Ryan Walsh, the host who had been so ready to mock her, approached the piano with visible discomfort. For perhaps the first time in his television career, the polished smile seemed genuine, tinged with something that looked remarkably like respect. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice softer than before. That was extraordinary. He offered his hand to help her rise from the bench. Rose accepted it, noting how his earlier condescension had vanished. As she stood, the audience's applause swelled again. An elderly man in the front row wiped tears from his eyes. A young woman clutched her hands to her chest, mouth slightly open in wonder. The three judges at their table looked equally stunned. The woman in the center, a well-known music producer named Vivian, pressed the button on her microphone. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her professional composure slightly cracked. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Rose moved carefully to stand beside Ryan, who handed her a microphone of her own. The weight of it felt strange in her hand. She had never been one to seek the spotlight. And now hundreds of eyes were fixed upon her, waiting. "I studied at the Eastern Conservatory of Music," Rose replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A long time ago." "That wasn't just studying," said the male judge to Vivian's left, a concert pianist whose name Rose couldn't recall. "That was mastery. Chopin's First Ballade is one of the most technically challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. Professional pianists spend years perfecting it." The third judge leaned forward. "Why didn't you pursue music professionally?" "With that level of talent, life happens," Rose interrupted gently. "I met my husband Thomas during my final year at the conservatory. He was studying engineering. We fell in love, got married. I taught piano lessons from home while raising our children." She paused, memories washing over her. "Thomas always encouraged me to play. He built shelves for my music books, made sure the piano was perfectly tuned even when money was tight. He'd sit and listen every evening after dinner, no matter how tired he was from work." Ryan, seemingly having recovered his professional poise, asked, "And you've continued playing all these years?" Rose shook her head. "Not really. After Thomas died 3 years ago, I couldn't bring myself to touch the keys. The piano was the heart of our home. Without him there to listen," her voice faltered slightly, "then how did you just play like that?" Ryan pressed, genuine curiosity replacing his usual calculated questioning. "After 3 years without practice?" Rose looked down at her hands, weathered, wrinkled, the knuckles swollen from arthritis. Hands that had kneaded bread, planted gardens, held children, and somehow remembered the intricate patterns of Chopin. "Music doesn't just live in the fingers," she said softly. "It lives in the heart, in the soul. My body might have aged, but the music," she touched her chest, "it was always there, waiting." In the control room, producer Davis Parker watched the monitors with a mixture of frustration and fascination. This wasn't at all what he had planned. The Golden Years, Golden Laughs segment was supposed to be lighthearted mockery, seniors attempting youthful activities and failing humorously. It was supposed to get easy laughs and social media clips. Instead, this elderly woman had just delivered what might be the most genuine, powerful moment in the show's history. His assistant stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, completely unprofessional but somehow appropriate for the moment. "What do we do?" his assistant whispered. Davis hesitated, then pressed the button on his headset. "Ryan, ask about her teaching. Let's see where this goes." On stage, Ryan touched his earpiece and nodded slightly. "Mrs. Chen, I understand you taught piano lessons?" "Yes, for almost 40 years, Rose replied. "Mostly children from the neighborhood. Nothing fancy." "Did any of your students go on to become professional musicians?" Rose's face brightened. "A few. Una Park plays with the symphony orchestra now. And Wei Chen, no relation to me, teaches at the same conservatory where I studied." From the side of the stage, Zoe watched with growing excitement. This was turning into something beautiful, something real in a show that had become increasingly artificial. She caught Rose's eye and gave her a thumbs up. "One last question," Ryan said, glancing toward the control room for approval. "What made you decide to come on our show today?" Rose hesitated, looking at Ryan directly. She could say something polite, something that wouldn't embarrass anyone, but at 78 she had earned the right to speak truth. "I heard your staff talking before the show," she said quietly. "I know what this segment was supposed to be. Golden Years, Golden Laughs. You expected me to fail, to embarrass myself, to give your audience someone to laugh at." A hush fell over the studio. Ryan's face flushed red. In the control room, Davis cursed under his breath. "When I realized that," Rose continued, her voice growing stronger, "I almost left. But then I thought of all the people my age who get dismissed, underestimated, made invisible. I thought maybe this was a chance to remind people that growing old doesn't mean becoming less. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. My husband Thomas always said, "Don't let anyone make you feel small." Today I played for him, and for everyone who's ever been told they're too old, too late, too anything to follow their heart. The applause began slowly, then built to a roar that seemed to shake the studio walls. People rose to their feet once more. Even the cameramen were clapping, equipment momentarily forgotten. Ryan stood awkwardly beside Rose, his expression a complicated mix of shame and admiration. In the control room, Davis turned to his team. "Change of plans. We're extending this segment. Get her family on the phone, children, grandchildren, anyone. See if we can get them here for the final recording. And find those students she mentioned, the symphony player and the professor." His assistant stared at him in surprise. "What about the other Golden Years contestants waiting backstage?" Davis considered this. Interview them, but differently. Find out their real stories, their real talents. No more mockery. This segment just got a complete overhaul. Back on stage, the applause finally quieted. Vivian, the music producer judge, approached Rose with something in her hand. A business card. "Mrs. Chen," she said warmly, "I work with a foundation that provides scholarships to music students. We also sponsor a concert series featuring overlooked talent. I would be honored if you would consider performing." Rose took the card, stunned by the offer. "I'm an old woman with arthritis. Hardly concert material." Vivian shook her head firmly. "What you just showed us transcends age and physical limitations. Music like that deserves to be heard." As stagehands began preparing for the next segment, Zoe hurried over to escort Rose backstage. "You were amazing," she whispered excitedly. "You completely changed everything." In the green room, Rose sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The emotional and physical toll of the performance had caught up with her. Her hands ached fiercely now, but it was a pain she welcomed, the good kind that came from doing something worthwhile. The door burst open and Penny, the makeup artist, rushed in, followed by several other staff members who had watched from behind the scenes. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," Penny said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "You've got everybody crying back there." "I never expected," Rose began, but was interrupted by another staff member. "Mrs. Chen, there are reporters outside asking to speak with you. And Mr. Parker, the producer, wants to discuss extending your segment for the final show." Rose looked down at Vivian's business card, still held between her fingers. 24 hours ago, she had been alone in her apartment, making tea and doing crossword puzzles, wondering how she would manage to pay her property taxes. Now somehow she was being asked to give interviews and perform in concerts. "It's a lot to take in," she said honestly. "Could I have a moment alone?" When the room emptied, Rose closed her eyes and pictured Thomas. She could almost hear his laugh, the one he reserved for moments when life surprised them in wonderful ways. "What do you think of all this, old man?" she whispered. "Did you know this would happen when you bought me that piano?" She could almost hear his answer. "I always told you the music wasn't finished with you yet, Rosie." A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Zoe peeked in. "Sorry to disturb you, but there's someone here I think you might want to meet." She opened the door wider to reveal a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, clutching a well-worn music book to her chest. The girl's eyes were wide with admiration. "Mrs. Chen," the girl said shyly, "my name is Lily. I'm learning piano and I—" She swallowed nervously. "I wondered if you would sign my Chopin book. And maybe tell me how you make it sound like that." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes as she nodded and gestured for the girl to come closer. In that moment, she understood that today's performance wasn't just about proving the producers wrong or honoring Thomas's memory. It was about passing the music forward. The week after the taping flew by in a blur. Rose could hardly believe how her life had transformed. Her quiet apartment, once a place of solitude and memories, now buzzed with activity and new possibilities. The morning after the show, her phone had rung constantly. First, it was her daughter Grace calling from Seattle after receiving a surprising call from the Hidden Stars producers. "Mom, what in the world is going on?" Grace had asked, her voice a mixture of concern and amazement. "Some TV producer called saying you played piano on national television and they want us to fly out for the final episode?" Rose had laughed, the sound surprising even herself. How long had it been since she'd laughed like that? It's a long story, dear. But yes, I played Chopin on television. Her son Michael and his wife arrived that afternoon, having driven 4 hours after seeing clips of Rose's performance shared online. "Mom, you're trending," Michael had said, showing her his phone where thousands of people were sharing videos of her playing, adding comments like "goals for my retirement" and "never underestimate your grandma." By evening, local news vans had parked outside her apartment building. Neighbors she barely knew brought her flowers and food. Mrs. Patterson from downstairs, the neighbor who had supposedly recommended her to the show, though Rose now understood that had been a fabrication, came up to apologize. "I never mentioned you to any TV people," she admitted. "I think they just picked names from the building directory. I'm so sorry if they tricked you, but my goodness, Rose, you were magnificent." Now 7 days later, Rose sat at her kitchen table with Zoe, who had become both friend and impromptu manager, helping her sort through the offers and invitations that kept arriving. "The symphony wants you to play during their community outreach concert next month," Zoe said, adding another letter to the consider pile. "And this one's interesting. The music department at City College is asking if you'd give a master class." Rose shook her head in disbelief. "A master class? Me? I haven't taught in years." "That's not what Una Park says," Zoe replied with a smile, sliding her tablet across the table. On the screen was an email from Rose's former student, now a respected violinist with the symphony orchestra. "Mrs. Chen was the most influential teacher in my development as a musician," Una had written. "Her understanding of emotional expression through technical precision shaped my entire approach to music. If she's teaching again, I'd sign up for her class in a heartbeat." Rose felt her eyes grow misty as she handed the tablet back. Una was always special, so sensitive to the music even as a child. Zoe added Una's email to a growing folder. "She's not the only one who remembers you, Rose. We've heard from 27 of your former students so far. Some are professional musicians, others just people who still play because of what you taught them." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Michael poked his head in. "The car's here, Mom. Are you ready?" Today was the filming of the follow-up segment for Hidden Stars. The producers had completely reimagined the Golden Years portion, turning it from a mockery into a celebration of talents refined over decades. Rose would be the centerpiece, but they had found other seniors with remarkable skills. A former ballet dancer in his 70s who still practiced daily, a woman who had been quietly writing poetry for 60 years, a retired math teacher who could calculate complex equations faster than a computer. "Just a moment," Rose said, standing slowly. Her fingers brushed against the keys of her piano as she passed, the old upright that Thomas had bought her. She had played it every day this week, working through the stiffness in her joints, reconnecting with the music that had waited so patiently within her. The ride to the studio felt different this time. Instead of apprehension, Rose felt a quiet confidence. Michael chatted with the driver while Grace fussed over Rose's outfit, a deep burgundy dress they had bought specially for the occasion. "Mom, what are you going to play today?" Grace asked. "The producer said you could choose anything," Rose smiled. "Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was your father's favorite." At the studio, the difference was immediately apparent. Where she had been nearly invisible before, now staff members greeted her by name, some asking shyly for pictures with her. Ryan Walsh, the host, approached with none of his previous condescension. "Mrs. Chen," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming back. I want to personally apologize for how we initially presented the segment. It was disrespectful and I'm truly sorry." Rose took his hand. "Apology accepted, Mr. Walsh. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." Ryan looked relieved. "We've completely revamped the show based on what happened with your performance. No more mockery, no more setting people up to fail. We want to celebrate authentic talent, whatever the age or background." "That sounds like a show worth watching," Rose replied. The green room was now filled with the other senior performers, all chatting excitedly. Rose was introduced to Philip, the former ballet dancer, Dolores, the poet, and Herbert, the math genius. They shared stories of lives fully lived and talents nurtured through decades. "I never thought I'd be on television at 76, Dolores admitted, her gray hair elegantly styled. "My grandchildren can't believe it. They're all coming to the taping." "Mine too," Rose said. "Even my granddaughter from Japan is flying in. I haven't seen her in 3 years." Producer Davis Parker entered, looking more genuine than during their first meeting. "We're almost ready. Mrs. Chen, after the group introduction, we'd like you to go first. Your story has really resonated with people." The lights seemed less harsh this time, the cameras less intrusive. When Rose walked onto the stage alongside the other seniors, the audience greeted them with respectful applause. Ryan introduced each performer with genuine interest in their stories. When it was Rose's turn to play, she moved to the piano with steady purpose. The Steinway gleamed under the lights, but now it felt like an old friend, rather than an instrument of potential humiliation. "Mrs. Chen will be playing Debussy's Clair de Lune," Ryan announced, a piece that held special meaning for her and her late husband. Rose settled onto the bench, positioning her hands above the keys. In the front row, she could see Grace and Michael. Behind them sat her grandchildren, including May, newly arrived from Japan. And there, standing quietly at the back of the audience, were dozens of her former piano students, Una Park, Wei Chen, and many others. Some she hadn't seen in 20 years. The first gentle notes of Debussy's masterpiece filled the studio. Unlike the technical fireworks of the Chopin piece, Clair de Lune required delicate touch and emotional sensitivity. Rose poured her heart into every phrase, each note a distillation of memory and love. The audience sat transfixed as the haunting melody washed over them. When she finished, the applause was different from last time. Not thunderous shock, but deep appreciation. Many were wiping tears from their eyes. Ryan approached, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Would you mind telling us what this piece means to you?" Rose nodded. "Thomas, my husband, first heard me play this at a small recital when we were dating. Years later, he told me it was the moment he knew he wanted to spend his life with me. He said the way I played made him feel like he was seeing moonlight for the first time." She smiled at the memory. "For our 50th wedding anniversary, we danced to it in our living room." As Ryan moved on to introduce the next performer, Rose made her way backstage where her family waited. May, her youngest granddaughter, hugged her tightly. "Grandma, that was amazing," she said in slightly accented English. "I didn't know you could play like that." "There are many things you don't know about your old grandma," Rose replied with a wink. Later, during a break in filming, Vivian, the music producer judge, approached with a distinguished-looking man in a suit. "Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Huang from the Eastern Conservatory of Music," she said. "He has something he'd like to discuss with you." Dr. Huang bowed slightly. "Mrs. Chen, your performance has caused quite a stir in our alumni community. We've been going through the archives, and we found your student records from 55 years ago. Your professors had written that you were one of the most promising pianists of your generation." Rose felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "That was a very long time ago, Dr. Huang. Talent like yours doesn't disappear," he replied. "We would like to offer you a position as an artist in residence at the conservatory. You would give occasional master classes, mentor promising students, perhaps play a recital when you feel up to it. Nothing too demanding, but a chance to share your gift with a new generation." Rose stood speechless. The conservatory, the place she had left behind all those years ago to build a life with Thomas. Now it was opening its doors to her again, more than half a century later. I don't know what to say," she managed finally. Dr. Huang smiled. "You don't have to answer right away, but I hope you'll consider it. Sometimes life offers us second chances when we least expect them." As they returned to the stage for the final segment of filming, Rose caught sight of a small figure standing in the wings. Lily, the young pianist who had asked for her autograph. Beside her stood several other children, all clutching music books and watching with wide eyes. In that moment, Rose knew what her answer to Dr. Huang would be. The music that had sustained her through joy and sorrow, that had waited patiently while she built a family and a life, that had returned to her when she needed it most. That music deserved to be passed on. The circle was completing itself in ways she never could have imagined. And somewhere Rose was certain Thomas was smiling. 6 months had passed since Rose Chen's life had changed on the Hidden Stars stage. The small apartment that had once seemed so quiet now buzzed with activity most days. The piano, once covered in dust, gleamed from regular use and care. Rose sat at her kitchen table sipping tea and looking through her calendar for the week ahead. 2 master classes at the conservatory, a small recital at the community center, and tea with Una to discuss their joint project, a series of workshops for children from underserved neighborhoods. The doorbell rang, and Rose smiled, knowing who it would be. Every Tuesday morning, Lily arrived for her lesson, always 10 minutes early, always eager to begin. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," the young girl said cheerfully when Rose opened the door. She carried her usual music bag and a small package wrapped in colorful paper. "What's this?" Rose asked, accepting the gift. Lily bounced on her toes excitedly. "It's been exactly 6 months since I first met you. Mom said we should celebrate." Rose carefully unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. Opening it, she discovered staff paper, blank pages ready for musical notation. "Mom said you mentioned wanting to write down some of your own compositions," Lily explained. "I thought maybe you could teach me how to compose too someday." Rose felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. Of all the changes in her life, these Tuesday mornings with Lily had become perhaps the most precious. The girl reminded Rose of herself at that age, hungry for music, determined to master difficult pieces, seeing the world through sound. "That's very thoughtful," Rose said. "Shall we start our lesson and then perhaps spend a little time exploring composition?" Lily's face lit up. "Yes, please." They moved to the piano, where Lily proudly demonstrated her progress on the Chopin nocturne they'd been working on. Her small hands stretched carefully across the keys, still developing the reach needed for some of the more challenging passages. "Remember what we talked about?" Rose guided gently. "Let your wrist relax here. The music needs to breathe." Lily adjusted her approach, and the passage immediately sounded more fluid, more alive. The look of wonder on her face when she heard the difference made Rose smile. "How do you always know exactly what will make it better?" Lily asked. "Years of making the same mistakes myself," Rose replied with a chuckle. "Music is a lifelong conversation between you and the composer. The longer you speak with them, the better you understand what they were trying to say." After the lesson, as promised, Rose opened the new journal and began showing Lily the basics of notation. They were so absorbed that they almost didn't hear the knock at the door. It was Zoe carrying a large envelope. "Sorry to interrupt the lesson," she said, smiling at Lily. "But this just arrived from the network, and I thought you'd want to see it right away." Rose opened the envelope to find viewing figures and press coverage for the Hidden Stars special that had aired the previous week. The show had completely reimagined itself following Rose's first appearance, focusing on genuine talent and inspiring stories rather than mockery or cheap laughs. The special, titled "Second Act's Never Too Late to Shine," had featured Rose prominently, following her journey from that first unexpected performance to her new role at the conservatory. The ratings were the highest in the show's history. "They're talking about a possible series," Zoe said excitedly. "Not a competition, but documentary-style profiles of people who found or reclaimed their passions later in life. They want you to be the first episode." Rose shook her head in amazement. Who would have thought that being invited to be laughed at would lead to all this? After Lily's lesson and Zoe's visit, Rose took a taxi to the conservatory. The historic building, with its arched windows and worn stone steps, had once been the center of her world. Walking through its halls again after more than 50 years felt both strange and familiar, like returning to a childhood home. Students nodded respectfully as she passed. Some even whispered to each other, "There went Rose Chen," the pianist who had become famous in her 70s, whose videos had millions of views online, who had shown that talent didn't expire with age. Dr. Huang met her in the faculty lounge. Mrs. Chen, perfect timing. The board has approved your proposal for the intergenerational concert series. We can begin planning for the fall semester." Rose had suggested bringing together young students and older musicians who had set aside their art for various reasons: career, family, health. They would perform together, learning from each other's different perspectives and experiences. "That's wonderful news," Rose said. "I've already heard from several of my former students who want to participate, and at least a dozen seniors from my community center classes." After discussing the details, Rose made her way to the small practice room that had been assigned to her. It wasn't grand, just enough space for a piano, a chair, and a small bookshelf, but it had excellent acoustics and a view of the flowering trees in the courtyard. She was reviewing music for her afternoon master class when a knock came at the door. It was Wei Chen, her former student who now taught music theory at the conservatory. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Wei said. "I wanted to show you something before your class." He handed her a book, a new edition of teaching materials for advanced piano students. Rose opened it to find her own name listed as a contributor. I included your fingering suggestions for the Debussy preludes, Wei explained, and that exercise you developed for building strength in the fourth finger. I hope that's all right. Students have found them incredibly helpful. Rose was touched. The techniques she had developed over decades of teaching, the small innovations she had created to help struggling students, they would live on, even when she was gone. Of course it's all right, she said. Teaching is about passing knowledge forward. The masterclass that afternoon went brilliantly. 4 advanced students performed pieces they were preparing for recitals, and Rose guided them with gentle but precise feedback. The room was packed, not just with piano students, but with faculty members curious about the woman who had become an unexpected celebrity. One young man played the very Chopin ballade that Rose had performed on television. His technique was flawless but somehow mechanical. You've mastered the notes, Rose told him. Now you need to find the story behind them. Chopin wasn't just writing pretty music. He was speaking of love, loss, homeland, exile. Close your eyes for a moment. What does this music mean to you personally? The student looked surprised by the question. I never thought about it that way. Try again, Rose suggested. But this time, play as if you're telling someone a story that changed your life. When he began again, the difference was remarkable. The same notes, played with new understanding, touched everyone in the room differently. Several people wiped away tears. After the class, as students gathered around to ask questions, Rose caught sight of a familiar figure at the back of the room, Ryan Walsh, the TV host who had once been ready to mock her. He approached when the students had gone, looking somewhat out of place among the music stands and sheet music. Mrs. Chen, he said, extending his hand, I hope you don't mind me sitting in. I'm working on a new project, a documentary about how entertainment often exploits people for cheap laughs, and how we can do better. That sounds worthwhile, Rose replied, genuinely impressed by his transformation. What brought this on? Ryan looked slightly embarrassed. Your performance changed things for me, made me question what I was doing with my platform, my influence. I've been taking a hard look at my career choices. As they talked, Rose realized how much had rippled outward from that one moment when she decided not to walk away, not to accept the role of punchline they had planned for her. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Rose sat at her piano as dusk gathered outside. Her fingers moved gently over a simple melody she had been developing, her first attempt at composition in over 50 years. The phone rang, and she answered to hear her granddaughter May's voice from Japan. Grandma, I got the music scholarship. I'll be coming to study at the conservatory next fall. We can see each other every week. After they talked, Rose returned to the piano, adding notes to the composition she now knew would be for May. As she played, she thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her here. If the producers hadn't tried to humiliate her, if she hadn't found the courage to play anyway, if Zoe hadn't encouraged her to prove them wrong, how different everything would be. The piano might still be gathering dust. The music might have remained locked away. All these new connections with students, with her family, with her own forgotten dreams, might never have formed. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Mrs. Patterson from downstairs. Sorry to bother you, Rose, she said hesitantly. But I heard you playing, and it reminded me. I used to play violin years ago. I've been thinking about starting again, after seeing what you did. Do you think, at my age? Rose smiled and opened the door wider. Come in, Nancy, let's talk about music. That night, as Rose prepared for bed, she paused at the photograph of Thomas on her nightstand, the one taken on their 50th anniversary, both of them at the piano. Well, old man, she whispered, you always said I needed to get out more. She could almost hear his chuckle, feel the gentle pressure of his hand on her shoulder. Tomorrow would bring more students, more music, more chances to share what she had learned in her 78 years. The journey that had begun with an attempt to make her a punchline had instead given her a voice, not just at the piano, but in the world. Rose turned out the light, but in her mind, the music played on. Not the grand, showy pieces that had impressed television audiences, but something simpler and more profound, the quiet, persistent melody of a life being lived fully at every age.